Whispers in the reeds the haunting tale of the Willows. The Danube stretched before us, a ribbon of silvery water, winding its way through the heart of Europe. My companion and I had been canoeing down this ancient river for weeks, reveling in the freedom and adventure of our journey. But as we approached the border between Hungary and Slovakia, the landscape began to change, taking on a wild and primeval aspect that sent a shiver of excitement and something else, something closer to fear, down my spine. It was late afternoon when we first caught sight of the island. Rising from the midst of the river, it seemed to float on the water like some great, half-submerged beast. Dense thickets of willow covered its surface, their slender branches swaying in the breeze, creating a constant whisper that seemed to call to us across the water. "What do you think?" I asked my companion, a Swede named Peterson, nodding towards the island. "It looks like a good place to make camp for the night." Peterson frowned, his eyes narrowing as he studied the willows. "There's something odd about it," he said slowly. "Can't you feel it? It's as if the island is watching us." I laughed, dismissing his concerns as mere fancy. "It's just an island, old chap. Come on, let's head for it. The sun will be setting soon, and I'd rather not be caught on the river after dark." As we paddled towards the island, I couldn't shake the feeling that Peterson's words had stirred something in me. The willows did seem unusually active, their branches weaving and bobbing in a complex dance that didn't quite match the rhythm of the wind. And was it my imagination, or were the whispers growing louder as we drew closer? We beached our canoe on a small, sandy bank at the edge of the island. As soon as my feet touched the ground, I felt a strange sensation, as if the earth itself was vibrating beneath me. I glanced at Peterson, wondering if he felt it too, but he was busy unloading our gear from the canoe. We set up camp in a small clearing near the water's edge, surrounded on all sides by the ever-present willows. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our campsite, I found myself growing increasingly uneasy. The whispers from the willows had not abated with the fading light. If anything, they seemed to have grown more insistent, more purposeful. "Do you hear that?" I asked Peterson as we sat by our small campfire, eating a simple meal of bread and cheese. He nodded, his face grave in the flickering firelight. "I've been hearing it since we landed. It's not just the wind, is it?" I shook my head. "No, it's not. It's as if the willows are trying to speak to us." As night fell, the island seemed to come alive around us. The whispers from the willows grew louder, punctuated by odd, rustling sounds that seemed to come from all directions at once. Shapes moved in the darkness beyond our firelight, always just at the edge of vision, disappearing when I tried to focus on them. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and filled with strange dreams. I found myself wandering through endless groves of willows, their branches reaching out to grasp at my clothes, their whispers growing ever louder until they became a deafening roar. I woke with a start, my heart pounding, to find the first light of dawn creeping across the sky. Peterson was already awake, his face pale and drawn. "Did you feel it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "During the night, it was as if the whole island was moving beneath us." I was about to dismiss his words as the product of a restless night, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Our canoe, which we had pulled well up onto the bank the night before, was now floating in the river, straining against the rope that tied it to a nearby tree. "That's impossible," I muttered, staring at the canoe in disbelief. "The river couldn't have risen that much overnight. And even if it had, why aren't we underwater?" Peterson shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "It's the island," he said. "It's alive somehow. We need to leave now." But as we rushed to pack up our camp, it became clear that leaving would not be as simple as we had hoped. The willow branches seemed to actively impede our progress, tangling around our feet and snagging our clothes. The whispers had grown to a constant, maddening susurration that made it difficult to think clearly. When we finally reached the spot where we had beached our canoe, we found that the sandy bank had disappeared entirely. The willows now grew right up to the water's edge, their roots disappearing into the swirling current. Our canoe bobbed in the water, still tied to the tree, but now surrounded by a thicket of willow branches that had not been there the night before. As we stood there, trying to figure out how to reach our canoe, I became aware of a presence behind us. Turning slowly, I saw that the willows had closed in around us, forming a tight circle that cut off any retreat back into the island. And in the gaps between the swaying branches, I caught glimpses of something. Shapes that were not quite solid, not quite real, but undeniably there. "Peterson," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant in my own ears. "I think we may have made a terrible mistake in coming here." My companion didn't respond. When I turned to look at him, I found him staring fixedly at something in the willows, his face a mask of terror. Following his gaze, I saw a gap in the branches that seemed darker than the others, a void that hurt the eyes to look at directly, and from that void emerged a tendril of something. Not quite solid, not quite gas, it wavered in the air like heat haze given form. As we watched, paralyzed with fear, more of these tendrils began to emerge from the gaps between the willows. They reached towards us with a terrible, alien purposefulness that left no doubt as to their intent. This was no natural phenomenon, no trick of light or shadow. The island, or something on it, was alive, and it wanted us. Peterson was the first to break from his trance. With a strangled cry, he lunged for the canoe. Heedless of the willow branches that tore at his clothes and skin, I followed close behind, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. We practically fell into the canoe, our hands shaking so badly we could barely untie the rope that held it to the shore. As we pushed off, I caught one last glimpse of the island. The willows were in a frenzy now, their branches whipping back and forth as if in a gale, though the air around us was eerily still. And between them, I saw those shapes again, more solid now, pressing against some unseen barrier, as if trying to break through into our world. We paddled with a desperation born of absolute terror, not daring to look back until we were well away from the island. When we finally did, we saw that it looked normal. Just an unremarkable patch of land in the middle of the river, covered in willows that swayed gently in the breeze. But we knew better. We had glimpsed something that day, something that lurked just beyond the veil of our reality. The willows had been a conduit, a gateway to a realm that was never meant for human eyes. And though we had escaped, I knew that the memory of what we had seen, and what had almost happened to us, would haunt us for the rest of our lives. As we continued our journey down the Danube, neither of us spoke much about what had happened on the island. It was as if by not talking about it, we could somehow make it less real. But in the quiet moments, when the river was still, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of water against our canoe, I would catch Peterson looking back the way we had come, his face etched with a mixture of fear and longing. I understood that look all too well. For as terrifying as our experience had been, it had also awakened something in us. We had stood at the threshold of a mystery beyond human comprehension, had felt the breath of an alien world on our faces, and part of me, a part I was ashamed to acknowledge, wanted to go back, to understand, to know. But we didn't go back. We continued on our journey, eventually reaching the Black Sea and the end of our adventure. We parted ways there, Peterson returning to Sweden and I to England. We promised to keep in touch, but both of us knew that we probably wouldn't. Some experiences are too profound, too disturbing to be shared, even with those who lived through them with you. In the years that followed, I tried to put the incident behind me. I returned to my life in London, threw myself into my work, and tried to convince myself that what had happened on that island, in the Danube, had been nothing more than a shared hallucination, a product of isolation and an overactive imagination. But on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the trees outside my window, I would find myself back on that island. I would feel again the alienness of it, the sense of being in a place that was fundamentally wrong in some way I couldn't quite articulate. And I would remember the shapes I had seen moving in the willows, the tendrils reaching out for us, and I would lie awake until dawn, afraid to close my eyes, lest I dream of that other world pressing against the boundaries of our own. I tried to research the island, to find out if others had experienced similar phenomena there, but my efforts were frustratingly fruitless. The Danube has countless islands along its length, and without exact coordinates, it was impossible to pinpoint the one we had stayed on. And even if I could have found it, who would believe my story? Who would understand the profound wrongness we had felt, the sense of being in the presence of something utterly alien to human experience? As the years passed, I found myself drawn more and more to stories of the supernatural and the unexplained. I read voraciously about other encounters with the unknown, always searching for something that might shed light on what we had experienced, but nothing quite matched the terror and wonder of that night among the willows. I often wondered about Peterson. Had he been able to put the experience behind him? Or did it haunt him as it haunted me? I imagined him in Sweden, perhaps married now, with children of his own. Did he ever tell them about the island? Did he ever wake in the night, his heart racing, convinced he could hear the whisper of willow branches outside his window? Once, about 5 years after our Danube trip, I received a letter from Peterson. It was brief, just a few lines, but it chilled me to the bone. "I'm going back," he wrote. "I have to know. If you don't hear from me again, you'll know why." I never did hear from him again. I considered going after him, retracing our journey down the Danube. in search of the island and my lost friend. But in the end, I couldn't bring myself to do it. The fear was too great, the memory of what we had seen too vivid. And perhaps deep down, I knew that if I found the island again, I might not have the strength to leave it a second time. So I stayed in London, living my life as best I could, with the knowledge of what lay just beyond the veil of our reality. I married, had children of my own, built a career. But always, always, there was the memory of the willows, of the whispers, and the shapes in the darkness. As I grew older, I found myself thinking more and more about that night on the island. Not with fear anymore, but with a kind of wistful curiosity. What exactly had we encountered there? Was it, as we had believed in our terror, something alien and malevolent? Or was it simply so far beyond our understanding that we had interpreted it as a threat? I began to write down my memories of the event, trying to capture every detail, every sensation. It was cathartic in a way, exorcising the demons that had haunted me for so long. But it also stirred up old fears, old questions. The more I wrote, the more I realized how much I still didn't understand about what had happened to us. One day, as I was working on my account of the incident, my youngest granddaughter came into my study. She was a curious child, always asking questions, always wanting to know more about the world. She saw the papers on my desk and asked what I was writing. For a moment, I hesitated. Should I tell her? Should I pass on this knowledge, this burden? But looking into her eager young face, I made a decision. I would tell her the story, but as just that, a story. A tale of adventure and mystery. Not the life-altering encounter it had truly been. So I told her about two friends, canoeing down the Danube, about an island covered in willows, about strange whispers and shapes in the night. I watched her eyes widen with excitement and a touch of fear, saw her lean in closer as I described our frantic escape. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she looked up at me, her eyes shining. "Is it true, Grandpa?" she asked. "Did that really happen to you?" I smiled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "It's just a story, my dear," I said. Just a story. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind outside, I found myself wondering, had I done the right thing in keeping the truth from her? Or had I, in my desire to protect her, denied her a glimpse of the wonder and mystery that lies just beyond our everyday world? I thought about the willows, about the whispers and the shapes in the darkness. I thought about Peterson, wherever he might be now. And I realized that, for all the fear and confusion it had caused me, my encounter on that island had given me something precious too. It had shown me that the world is vaster and stranger than we can imagine, that there are mysteries out there beyond our comprehension. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would tell my granddaughter the truth, not to frighten her, but to open her eyes to the wonders that might be waiting out there, just beyond the veil of our ordinary reality. Because in the end, isn't that what life is about? Exploring, questioning, pushing the boundaries of what we know and understand. And who knows, perhaps one day, she might find herself on a river, approaching an island covered in willows. And when she hears the whispers on the wind, she'll know that she stands at the threshold of something extraordinary. In the years that followed, I found myself returning to the story of the Willows again and again. It became a touchstone for me, a reminder of the vast unknown that exists just beyond the edges of our perception. I began to see echoes of our experience everywhere, and in the rustling of leaves on a windy day, in the play of shadows on a moonlit night, in the eerie stillness that sometimes falls over the world in the hours before dawn. I never did go back to the Danube, never tried to find that island again. But in a way, I carried it with me always. It had changed me, opened my eyes to possibilities I had never before considered, and while the fear never entirely went away, it was tempered now by a sense of wonder, a deep appreciation for the mysteries of the universe. As I entered my twilight years, I found myself thinking more and more about what lay beyond this life. Would I, perhaps, finally understand what we had encountered on that island? Would the veil be lifted, revealing the truths that had eluded me for so long? I don't know the answers to these questions. But as I sit here, pen in hand, committing these final thoughts to paper, I find that I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever lies beyond, be it an eternity of peace, a new adventure, or something utterly beyond my comprehension, I'm ready to face it. And if someday you find yourself on a river, approaching an island covered in willows, remember this story. Listen for the whispers on the wind. Look for the shapes moving in the shadows, and know that you stand at the threshold of something extraordinary. The universe is vast and full of wonders, and some of its greatest mysteries may be found in the most unexpected places, even in a simple grove of willows on a lonely island in the Danube.